My name is Dai, and I'm a human trafficking survivor. In 1995, I fell in love with a military man. He convinced me to move with him to a secluded location. At that location, he handcuffed me to a door of an abandoned house where I was constantly raped and beaten. One day, I finally managed to escape. However, he had confiscated my naturalization papers, my driver's license, and my social security card before I left. Without any proof of identification, I wasn't able to find any shelter sufficient enough for me to live in. I simply kept moving from homeless shelter to homeless shelter. One day, I was approached by a middle-aged woman. I didn't know she was a pimp. The woman convinced me to work for escort services by claiming that it was a dating service, not sex. At first, I got a stable living because I was being paid for dates, not sex. However, one day a client surprised me by trying to bargain for sex. I refused and was subsequently grabbed by the hair, forced onto the floor, and was raped and beaten. I tried to go to the police, but they said that I had no rights, and that my status was as a streetwalker. What they said shocked me. Eventually, the female pimp sent me to a man who worked in Nevada. There, many girls and I were stored in basements, under casinos, and abandoned warehouses in Las Vegas. No one could hear our cries for help. We were separated from the other side of the world. While tourists roamed the streets of Las Vegas, admiring the architectural beauty and the celestial lights which permeated the night sky, we, the victims, were in perpetual fear for our lives. We were mainly transported by trucks, driven by people who knew exactly who we were. Eventually, I didn't care whether I lived or died. The countless death threats from my master kept me silent. I was finally able to escape my master when a rich man bought me. He never physically abused me, but he taught me how to be a pimp of my own. I found myself involved in the same industry that traumatized me. I was deceived and controlled by the power it gave me. I fell into a serious depression and started using a large amount of narcotics.
At first glance, it may seem as if Dai was just an unlucky woman to stumble into the industry of human trafficking. But think about it. Is it really unlucky if millions of people around the world face her same struggle? I don't think so. Dai may not have known why the military man came in the first place. She may not know how she ended up in the same institution that victimized her. Human trafficking must have a cause, but not just one cause, many causes. We talked with Sergeant Kyle Oakey, an expert on human trafficking, who has served as the Human Trafficking Task Force Supervisor of San Jose for 3.5 years.
The biggest factor is money, it's greed. You have to understand drugs, they're made, sold, and used one time. Individuals that are taken and put into slavery can be sold and used over and over again. So they're worth a whole lot more money, and people are greedy, so people want to make money.
The human life can be reused. So if that's labor, if that's domestic servitude, if that's going to be sex exploitation, any number of the ways that we see coercion and force used to get a certain good out of a person, it's reusable. And that's the unfortunate condition for why it continues to exist.
As we learned earlier, trafficking brings in over $150 billion internationally. And this is simply a rough estimate. Companies often find themselves wanting to save money by trafficking young children to work in factories. In fact, the International Labor Organization tells us there are currently 168 million child laborers, with over 85 million of them involved with hazardous work. Others exploit women's bodies to make profits for their business.
We have Vietnamese cafes where young kids are brought in, the females specifically, and they work in these establishments. I can tell you, I went into one establishment in the city of San Jose, and it had 4 16-year-old girls working in it, wearing next to nothing, which is a crime in and by itself. And it's all for the profit of the owner. When we talk to the owner, why do you have these young girls wearing no clothes? Because if I don't make money.
Pimps, traffickers, and child pornography offenders believed that their crimes were low risk, despite some fears of prosecution. Because trafficking brings in a 70% net profit, pimps and traffickers interviewed for the study took home between $5,000 and $32,833 a week. In Atlanta alone, sex trafficking brings in over $290 million each year. There are many causes of human trafficking. Poverty is a huge one. When people are trapped in cycles of poverty, they do whatever they can do to escape and find a better life for themselves and their families. However, those looking for new opportunities often find themselves tricked by deceitful individuals offering jobs, training, and other opportunities. Those who are in poverty are the most vulnerable to human trafficking, and many of them have less education, thus making them easier to exploit.
The victims that are brought here internationally, smuggled in potentially illegally or on a different type of visa. And then they're forced into domestic servitude, becoming nannies, sexual exploitation, working in massage parlors, working in different businesses where they think they're coming down for one purpose, but then once they're here, forced into some other type of job that they're not willing to do or don't want to do. We also have the street corner vendors that sell either the fruit or the flowers on the corner. How many of those individuals could potentially be human trafficking victims? We had a case that we worked with San Francisco where the victims were transported from a small town in Mexico to San Jose. They lived in San Jose. Every morning they woke up, went to Salinas. In Salinas, they bought their fruit. They went to San Francisco to sell it. They had to stay out in San Francisco and sell it all day. No bathroom breaks, no lunch breaks. They sold it until they were done. If they didn't sell all their produce before they were done, they were brought to San Jose and they had to go door to door until they were done. So these are items that most people don't really think about. And it's the crimes that are right under our nose, but nobody pays attention.
These are, individuals for choices of their own that move north. And because of the stresses of migrant farming, having to move from crop to crop, not having a command of the language, not being in a land that's their own, individuals are not always aware in these cases of their rights. Even as illegal immigrant, as we might want to call them, they're not aware of the rights that still protect them. And so to that extent, you have farmers, you have coyotes that are taking advantage of these situations, who are trafficking the individuals and or saying, the extent to which you might have paid this individual $5,000 to be moved into the country, you still owe me, whatever the price amount is for having managed the visas, for having managed the transportation, sit in this safe house until I can get recoupment on that payment. And so an individual in that case is ultimately held against their will, very much in the ways that we might have, held slaves back in the day in the 17th and 18th centuries.
Another major theme of Catholic social teaching is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Basically, the economy must serve people, not the other way around. Catholic social teaching also values the right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, and to the organization and joining of unions, to private property, and to economic initiative. In addition, the Gospel of Matthew says that all workers should be paid a just and living wage. Human trafficking contradicts these values. It puts people to work for the economy, for the benefit of reaping profits for the corporations, and provides little to no pay for its victims. Furthermore, many governments are incapable of preventing trafficking due to reasons such as lack of infrastructure and corruption. Sometimes, in third world countries, country officials will take bribes to simply look the other way when these women and children are kidnapped and trafficked. Other issues with corruption include issues of porous borders, and even government officials being involved with international organized crime group networks. In addition, governments tend to treat human trafficking victims as criminals. Police arrest more than 1,000 victimized children a year for prostitution, a crime that they aren't capable of committing. While federal law mandates that minors cannot willingly be involved with human trafficking, the law simply isn't uniformly enforced. By punishing these victims, this simply pushes them back into the same situation since they have nowhere else to go. There is simply a lack of adequate legislation and political will and commitment to enforce existing legislation. Another reason why human trafficking continues to exist today is a lack of awareness for who the victims are and the difficulty of determining whether someone is a victim or not.
When you have labor cases, because there is forms of labor, those are more the hidden crimes. It's kind of behind closed doors, or it may be out in the open, but it's not something easily recognized. I can't go down the street and walk over and see someone selling fruit on a corner, someone selling a magazine at a door and say, you're a human trafficking victim. There's a lot more investigation that's required to really determine if they are. Whereas if I see a young girl posting herself on the internet, or a young boy, or walking down the street soliciting another individual for commercial sex act, I can say you're a victim of human trafficking based on your age and what's going on. To be a human trafficking victim, you have to prove some form of force, fraud, coercion, duress to be an element of the crime. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. These victims are individuals that are brought in internationally from other countries. Like I said, either smuggled here illegally, brought here on different types of visas, or coming here for a legitimate reason, but then being forced into doing something that's different. One of the things that most people don't realize or never thought about is how many domestic victims of human trafficking we have. You know, a lot of the victims that I've dealt with over the last 3.5 years have been domestic victims. They're your neighbors, they're your schoolmates, they're people that are out in your community. You just never know who that potential next victim could be.
Other factors that contribute to human trafficking are sexism and discrimination. In many third world countries, women are often trafficked and are seen as easy targets. Often their bodies are exploited for sex and prostitution. The mindset of some in other countries is that women don't have as many rights as men, and this sexist mindset encourages trafficking. So who is the most vulnerable to human trafficking? Pretty much anybody can be a victim or a victimizer, but women, children, and the poor are most likely to be victim. For the longest time in history, women have been considered below men. They had no say and no rights. They are easily sexualized and objectified. Many still go by this mindset, and this is the basis of the thought process of the trafficker. Children are vulnerable because they are easily coerced. They are too young to realize the dangers of human trafficking, and many, if not all, are too afraid to run away from their captors. And lastly, the poor are vulnerable because they have limited opportunities. Many are forced into the trafficking industry just to make a living. Catholic social teaching gives us a different outlook on the poor and vulnerable. According to the book of Exodus, one shall not oppress the poor or vulnerable, God will hear their cry. Everyone has a right to possess a sufficient amount of earth's goods for themselves. The needs of the poor, however, take priority over the desires of the rich. Our goal should be to enable the poor to become active participants in society, therefore eliminating possible human trafficking victims. The types of people who are the victimizers of the human trafficking industry vary widely, but the fact that certain people, namely doctors, are involved is difficult to believe.
If you do a little bit of research, you'll have the 2 doctors in Wisconsin. You know, they make a lot of money. They're both doctors, yet they went back to the Philippines and brought back a young child to be their servant, their slave within their house. They could afford to hire one here locally, but they chose to go back to their own country to pick up a young child, bring her back here with the promises of school, education, and a bright future, but in reality, she was their slave. She had to tend to every needs of that house and the children within that house.
In summary, human trafficking has many causes, from money, greed, poverty, to lack of awareness and infrastructure. So you may be thinking, is there any way to stop this $150 billion industry? In our next video, we discuss possible solutions to the problem of human trafficking and how we as a local, national, and global community can do to stop it.